It's Tanzu Tuesdays. Your host, Tiffany Jennings.
Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
we did it.
I'm so proud of you.
And actually, today's a very special stream. Do you know why today's a very special stream?
Well, it's not Australia Day related this time.
No, we hit 500 subscribers.
That's actually pretty awesome.
So it's not bad. Oh, hey, Sweet Killer 9, I see you on. How's it going? All right, so Tiffany, why don't we go ahead and what do we want to do? Roll the news?
Sure, why not? Let's do that.
Right.
So, as always, we start Tanzu Tuesdays because, well, that's this show. So it's every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So next week on February 9th, we have a deep dive into spring application events with Ollie Dropbaum. And I will have the episode up for that today. Sorry, it's not there right now if you go to tanzu.tv. Tomorrow we have code at 12 p.m. Pacific time, and that should be with Mark Heckler. Can't you tell we're totally on top of things this week?
Professionals.
I know. So then there's TGIK. So they're already up to episode 145. So they're like way ahead of us there. So that's this Friday, and that's at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Sorry for everyone in Europe and other locations that these times are kind of hard for. But so we have duck typing in Kubernetes, and that's with a brand new host, Scott Nichols.
And I have no idea what duck typing is, so I'm really looking forward to that one. Hopefully I'll learn something. I assume it's not literally ducks actually typing on keyboards. I mean, I would love to see that, but I don't think that's what it is.
I mean, I could totally see someone just like planting a duck. Like I actually just watched a video earlier today that had a duck in it. So I could just see like someone's pet duck like plopping on the keyboard and just like tapping keys. It might be kind of hard to work though. So we have Between Chair and Keyboard, and that's on February 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So it's a little bit better for some people. And it's with Nate Shuda, and he has conversations with a different, like each week it's a conversation with a different person. So the upcoming one is with Christopher Judd. There's Tanzu Talk, which is like a podcast turned video podcast thing that is approximately every day at 11 a.m. Central European time, that is run by Kote. So that one's a little more friendly to some people, such as you, Martin. So then we have some upcoming events.
So let me kick off the events. So Devops Days, Texas. I can't believe I've been organizing this for months, and I never thought, oh, I should actually talk about it on the streaming show I do every week. So Devops Days, Texas, a bunch of us who throughout Texas that organize Devops Days events are sad that we haven't had an event for nearly 2 years at this point because of world events. And it may not be anytime soon that we have another one. So we thought we would get together and kind of join forces and do a Texas-wide DevOps Days event versus the straight cities and do it all online. So we are frantically putting the finishing touches on that. And thankfully, all my experience streaming here is going to help us a lot with that, I hope. So that's DevOps Days Texas. That is March 2 and 3. Our CFP did just close, but we have some really strong keynotes coming up, and I'll maybe announce those as we get a little bit closer. We also have Dev Nexus coming up on Feb 17th, and Mark, Josh, and Nate, all from our team, will be speaking there, as well as Ollie, who was also on a previous, wasn't last week?
Yeah, he was the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was last week.
It's an ollie, not an ollie, and a different ollie.
Right.
It's an Ollie Martin sandwich.
So many ollies. And then on Feb 20 is the Global Diversity CFP Day. And we can put these links into chats, or you can use Google because it's not that difficult.
Rude.
And I think that is it for news. So Martin, why don't you unmute yourself and let's do some introductions. Martin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, I'm Martin. I live in Hamburg. That's in Germany, the northern part of Germany.
Hamburg's beautiful.
Yeah, it's so especially these days. It started to snow, even little bit of snowing. Wide landscape. It's really beautiful these days.
I need to
quite cold,
see
but
Hamburg snow photos.
it's beautiful. It hasn't been snowing for years, I think, but now it's really beautiful. So I work, of course, kind of from home, but even before the pandemic started, since I'm part of the member of the Spring group, the Spring engineering team, the core Spring engineering team, and my focus is on the tools. So my team and myself, we are hacking extensions for existing IDEs, plugins for existing developer tools to make, let's say, all Spring Boot and Spring app developers around the globe more productive and help them do their daily job and make them more productive, more effective. Hacking
nice. So,
Java code.
So when I'm typing away in VS Code and it starts auto-completing function names for me, I can thank you for that.
Up to a certain degree.
Look, just take the credit for it.
No. I know that, for example, there's an awesome Java extension for VS Code, and that's not done by us.
Right.
Which is interestingly, there's a funny story about that, because it is, if you download the most famous Java extension for VS Code, it is actually having a little kind of the core functionality of that is coming from Eclipse, but don't tell anybody. It's kind of usually the VS Code users, they hate these big heavyweight desktop IDEs. No, we're super lightweight, we're super slick. That's what VS Code is all about. And then if they start to use Java and say, oh, the Java experience is so awesome in VS Code, it's actually coming from the core functionality is coming from a headless Eclipse running side by side with the VS Code thing, which is funny, but it's not done by us. So, but we add some, let's say, Spring goodness on top of that.
Right. Nice.
Yeah, so far I think so far for the intro. That's what I'm busy and what I'm. That's the reason why I come to work every day, is basically make all the Spring app developers on the globe more productive and try to help them build more awesome Spring apps.
Very cool. So in Hamburg, what is your favorite Hamburg specific food?
Hamburg specific.
Yeah, like what's
you're looking
famous?
for the obvious answer, like hamburger.
I do not want the obvious
things
answer.
Like that.
I don't want the obvious answer. I want the like Berlin. I think of currywurst, right?
Yeah, of course. But there's a long argue between Berlin and Hamburg who really invented that, who put the first one out there, because some folks in Hamburg kind of think it's coming from Hamburg and things like that. So it's yeah, be careful with that discussion. So you
okay. Well, so maybe Berlin might be better known for doner. Would that be fair to say?
Maybe. At least there are.
But they stole that from somewhere too.
There's doner and then there's döner, and I don't know if they're the same or slightly different, but like they originated from like Turkey. I don't know. I love whenever I'm in Europe and I'm like, oh hey, I can, instead of like American fast food of McDonald's, which is better in Europe anyway, I can be like, oh, I want a bratwurst or I want a döner, and I could just go to some random place and try them all out, and it's delicious and not like break the bank.
Yeah, bratwurst is of course big in Hamburg, right? Put the pandemic stuff aside, of course, kind of in a regular, more normal world, you would get all these stuff on the street and things like that. But it's hard to think about a real Hamburg specific food. I think there is kind of a traditional one, which is called Lapskaus. Nobody have heard of that before. And it looks really strange. And most people don't like it, but that's, if you're really looking for a very Hamburg specific thing, that's maybe something you would choose.
Okay.
But whenever you come to Hamburg and you go to one of those restaurants, I would suggest not to take that. So it's really strange stuff.
Or get that and then something else so you can try it and then eat the other thing.
Yes. Make sure you take something else as well.
Right.
Salted meat or corned beef, potatoes, and onion. And like eggs and stuff.
You looked that up already?
Yeah.
Tiffany has the internet wired up directly into her brain.
But it's not just about the ingredients. It's also about the look. So if you look up some pictures, you will see that it looks.
Okay.
Yeah, with like the eyeball egg and some of them with like the beet in the meat, so it looks like it's beef.
Tiffany, why don't you share your screen and show us?
Oh yeah, that's
no.
We have the technology. Maybe. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, but it's really the red thing below the X. That's kind of the what's called Lapskaus, and it's sorry.
Is it raw meat, or does it just look a bit like it?
No. It just looks a bit like that. Okay. It's I think the red color is coming from
beet.
It's not coming from meat. It's coming from
beet, like beet.
Beet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Good to know.
I was just looking for the English word for that because I think I never used it in English, but
I've never seen this before. I think that looks like is that some like pickled herring or something on the side of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I will definitely try that and then eat something else.
Yes.
I'll try that and then I'll go to McDonald's on the way home.
There's good stuff beyond McDonald's in Hamburg. So
of course. All right. And then the other question we usually like to ask, Tiffany, you should ask. This is your question.
Hopefully it's the right question, but if you could be anywhere in the world right now, if it was, like after the pandemic, if you can go anywhere, where would you like to go?
If I would like to go anywhere in the world, I think I would like to go to Australia.
Nice.
I haven't been there yet, but I always want to go there. And I know some folks living there, and it would be just awesome to visit them and see them again after many, many years. And I think it's a beautiful continent, beautiful country. So would love to see that.
You can't really see it, but Paul got us all like a bunch of different snack things from Australia, and then there's like Vegemite.
Yeah, so last week was Australia Day, and so our team celebrated with a Australia snack box that I got for everyone, and it had some Vegemite and a bunch of other stuff in it.
Perfect.
And so I made everyone taste it, and one of Tash's children ran up to her husband with the Vegemite, and he didn't know what it was, and he took a huge mouthful of it and was full of regret.
Wait,
Martin, have you had Vegemite before?
No.
Oh, you've never had Vegemite before.
I might have done the same mistake, probably.
Have you had Marmite before?
I heard that before somewhere, but
all right. It's a very savory spread that you put on like toast. And it's if you think about boiling soy sauce down until it's like a thick paste, and then spreading that on your toast, that's about what it's like.
Okay. I will probably not try it.
Probably pass on that one.
Sweet Killer 9 was like, what is that? Spicy stuff?
All right. So I think we've got that covered. So why don't you, Martin, why don't you take it away and kick off the demo side of things?
Sure, yeah, can do that. So let me share my screen quickly. Hope that works. So let's not forget to press the magic button so that you can see all my screen. Hope that it works just fine. Where I would like to start is so the first thing that we, of course, as a team try to help people with is get started with a project, get started with Spring stuff. And usually if you listen to talks from Josh Long or something like that, he always mentioned, yeah, the best place to get started is start.spring.io, which it is, of course, right? So no question about that. You can go to the website, start.spring.io.
Now, aren't you supposed to start zooming in and keep saying start.spring.io?
Yeah. So
or do we just leave that gimmick for Josh?
No, that's up to Josh. But you can add your dependencies over here, and you can do all your favorite dependencies and get your Spring Boot starters on the project and things like that. But of course, since we are doing kind of IDE plugins, we really try to help people to make that more convenient for them. And instead of just generating a project, downloading a zip file, extracting the zip file again, importing that into the IDE and stuff like that, if you go to something like, for example, the Spring tools for Eclipse, so we do plugins for Eclipse, one of the most widely used development environments for Java-based stuff, there is already something like a nice little wizard that makes it easy for you to get started with your Springy projects. So it, of course, uses start.spring.io under the hood, but instead of going to the website, you can just do that directly here, define your the basic stuff about the project, and then go to the dependencies and select your dependencies, the Spring Boot version and whatever you want to have on your project. So you can see they're kind of frequently used ones at the beginning, or I can search for basically, let's say anything in that list and select the dependencies, see what I've selected, and then just press basically finish, and you're done, right? And the project shows up in your IDE as it's been generated by start.spring.io in the background, and you can start hacking, and you get your ready-to-use Spring project basically in 10 seconds within the IDE directly to use. So that is cool, I think, and we really like that, and I think people enjoy that. So many people are using start.spring.io are also using these wizards. And in addition to that, it's also pretty common to not only use one of those kind of freshly started empty projects, but maybe learn from an existing guide. So if you go, for example, to spring.io/guides, there are tons of guides making it easy for you to learn specific aspects of Spring. So for example, you can learn about building a RESTful web service, and then you can walk through the guide and do that step by step and learn from the code. And there's also kind of a nice little way to get that right into your IDE with another wizard to just import that guide. So if I search, for example, for the same one, like the REST service, it tells you, hey, you can just import that. I don't import the initial one because I just would like to show you the completed guide. And when I press finish, it imports the right project right within the IDE and shows me the documentation about the guide so that I can follow the documentation, hack on my code, and learn Spring that way, or learn the specific aspect, which I think is pretty useful. What we also did to make it really, I think, really easy to use those projects and to hack on those projects is, of course, you need a way to start up your projects and shut them down and do all that. And of course, in something like Eclipse, you can do that with launch configurations and things like that. But I'm not sure how you would use that. But typically, people configure launch config, they search for the right launch config, maybe they open this dialog, they see a huge bunch of different ways to launch apps, And then they try to configure everything and press run. And we tried to make it super easy for Spring users. So there's a little boot dashboard on the left side here. Of course, you can move that around. So maybe forget about the left side. You can put it anywhere. But it shows you all the Spring apps that you have in your workspace. And these, you can just click on them, like on this guide that I imported, and just press run over here. And then it just starts up that guide. It shows you nicely on which port this guide got started. So no need anymore to, what people usually do once they started their Spring app, look at the log output and try to find the right line with the Tomcat port. Oh, that started on port 8080, or what was the right port of this specific app? And if you have multiple apps because you're running microservices and many microservices in your IDE, you're looking up, oh, what's the right port of this microservice and of that app? It just shows you stuff right away. And to make it even easier, you can just double click and it opens up a browser. So you can directly jump to that. You don't need to remember the port. You don't need to open a web browser and type something in like localhost. It just opens stuff directly inside of a web browser for you with the right port for this app that you just started. And even if you have multiple ones running, you can just see them all here, which I think is, which I really like. In this case, interestingly, this app, it does not have anything at the default path defined. So that's why the error comes up. It only has something at the greeting level. So to show you more about that, I need to move that thing around a little bit. Yeah. I would like to change something. I would like to put the Spring Boot Actuators on this project, which is kind of an additional module that you can add to your Spring projects to make them kind of inspectable from the outside and manageable from the outside. So it exposes HTTP endports via HTTP or JMX, and you can get information of the app, whether it's running and what's the kind of the memory consumption, what are the endpoints, what are the beans. You can get a lot of information from the real running Spring Boot app. That's just one example, but that's the example that I will use. And in order to put that on the project, you would usually go to the kind of POM XML file and you would add the dependency for this specific starter module. In case you forgot to select that right from the beginning when using the wizard, or in this case, the guide does not have that. So we try to make that even easier for you. You can click on the POM file and you can go to a specific wizard to add additional starters. So something that you cannot really do on start.spring.io, you can only generate new projects. But here in the IDE, we go one step further and allow you to add additional starters. So in this case, it looks like you would generate a new project, tells you all the dependencies that are on start.spring.io for this specific boot version of your project. And you can just go ahead and add additional ones. And the interesting bits and pieces of this adding additional dependencies is that some of those dependencies that you would add, like this one here, would add a specific dependency entry to your POM file. And instead of just doing that for you, it tells you up front what the change will look like. So it shows you kind of a diff dialog saying, okay, if you would like to add this dependency, this is the change to your file. So would not do too much magic under the hood and changing stuff automatically, and you don't really know what's going on in the background. It will tell you exactly what it would do. In this case, add this dependency to your POM file. And you can just say, oh yeah, let's do that. In addition to that, there are dependencies on start.spring.io that do not only generate a specific POM file or specific dependencies inside of a POM file. Some of them, for example, also say, okay, I generate a properties file for you with specific properties that you usually use or you should customize when you create a project with this dependency. if you already have a project, you might already have a specific properties file, or you might already have specific things configured. In this case, the wizard tells you exactly what this dependency that you selected would add to the project, and you can pick and choose from. Say, okay, in this case, the dependency that got added to the POM file, check, I want that. And oh, if I would generate this project, it would, in this case, also generate a git ignore file for me, which I don't have on my project yet. So I can just double click and see, okay, this would be generated by start.spring.io. I don't have that. So give that to me as well. You press finish, and all the changes are effective in your project. So it makes it really easy over time to add additional stuff, more or less in the same way than they would have been generated in the first place if you selected them when you started to create your project. So I changed this guide, added the actuators, looks like they're showing up here. So let me restart that. I just press the button, it already stops and restarts. So no need to do this stop, start. Just say restart it for me. Looks like kind of the same. But what is interesting is that you can get additional information about this application that is running now on the Spring side. So if you click on these, show me the properties, you'll see, oh yeah, it's running on localhost 8080. Yeah, localhost 8080. Okay, that's all fine. But what about the request mappings? What about the endpoints that this application defines actually? And you can take a look. So in this case, you see, okay, it defines /greeting, as we've seen before in the code. And I could just double click on that and it would open that request mapping automatically for me. So it makes it really easy to navigate quickly through, or getting an overview, what are all my request mappings? And if I forgot where this mapping was implemented, actually, I can click on the other one and then it jumps to the code and tells me where this request mapping is implemented. In addition to that, this properties has additional information about beans and the environment, but I will not dive into the details about that too much now. What I would like to highlight instead is something that is very unique to these Spring tools that we implemented as an addition to Eclipse and VS Code and other development environments where you can also use those tools, is that once you put actuators on the project, you are in general able to inspect the app from outside, right? So you could go to your browser and do something like localhost 8080 actuators or so. Okay, I haven't enabled it, but usually if you enable that, you could go there and then would put out a JSON and telling you more about what's going on inside of the app. And we can use that information, and we do that to help you bridge this gap between what you see in your source code, because you have implemented stuff, you look at the source code, you see all your beans and all your classes and all your endpoints, and what is actually going on at runtime. Because Spring is doing stuff, right? It's wiring beans, creating objects, setting things up for you. So usually as a developer, you have to bridge this gap between, or kind of think about what's going on at runtime and what is implemented in my source code. When I just look at the source code, you have to bridge this gap yourself just by thinking about it or mentally imagining, okay, if I implement it this way, this should happen at runtime. And to make it easier for you to really understand what's going on at runtime, we use this information that is coming from the real running Spring Boot application, and we map that onto the source code. So we do this kind of this mapping automatically for you. And this is what you can see here in the code. I hope you can see it as kind of slightly highlighted with a greenish background. So whatever you see with this greenish background is additional information coming from a real running Spring Boot application. And if you hover over that, for example, you would see you get additional information, details. So the details, exactly what's showing up here is not super important, but you would see, for example, here's a get mapping. So request mapping, you would see, okay, this is really active in this specific project. And I could just click on it and jump to that request mapping. Request mappings are also kind of shown in line over here, so that it makes it easy. You can click on that and jump to that directly from the source code, because you can see, hey, this one is really active in my running application, and I can just jump to that.
So if we set a dynamic port, I think you just use port 0 to get a dynamic port, would it be smart enough to figure that dynamic port out and give you the link to that dynamic port?
Yeah, we can, let's just try that. So okay. If we say, for example, we add additional file, like application.properties, right? So, and we do something like port, let's see what content this tells me. Oh, there's kind of an additional nice feature of these Spring tools. It tells you about all the Spring Boot properties that are around with content assist and things like that. And if I do, tells you, oh, no, there's something else expected here. So a server port should be named. So then we do something like this, right? And then you start that up again. It gives you a random port. And this one, it's showing me that one. So if I go back to the controller, you would see that port showing up automatically for you, and you can just click it and it's jumping to that port, right? So no need to remember that port or trying to figure out what's going on there.
That's cool.
And another thing that I think that I like very much is if you, for example, duplicate the launch config. Let's say you have multiple applications running, right? Multiple versions of that. And in this case, you get the same context over here. Let's say it runs on that port, for example. So let's see if that works. You would see, okay, there are two applications, two instances of this application running. One is running on that port, one is running on the other port. They both have actuators on there, it's kind of both the same. If you go back to this one, you would actually, if you hover over here, see both, right? You can see both request mappings. In this case, you see one over here and one over here, right? So you can see, okay, this request mapping is running in two different processes at the same time, and you can jump to both and see exactly what's going on, which I think is pretty nice, especially if you think that you have maybe different configurations, or you have one instance of the app that's running inside of your cloud environment, one's running locally. You would like to compare those things because they, for some random reason, behave slightly different. You can look inside of both at the same time and see inside of your source code, what's the difference, right? So, hey, what's coming, what live information is coming from this instance, what live information is coming from that instance. And you can see both side by side and compare it and see where's the difference and what's going on behind the scenes, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, is that feature just specific to STS, or can I get to it through extensions in VS Code or Eclipse?
Yeah, you can basically do the same. So I stopped that app, by the way. I just clicked on this one, so it's stopped both for me. So still thinks that this one's active. Funny, but should remove that. I can do more or less the same in VS Code. It's roughly the same. The Spring Boot dashboard is not really available in VS Code. So the launch experience in VS Code goes through the regular VS Code launch experience. But for example, if I'm here, I have the pet clinic example in VS Code around, and I configured that to contain the actuators on the class path as well. And I configured a launch config for that. So when I launch that over here in VS Code, it starts up the app and starts up the pet clinic one. It looks all good. In VS Code, it doesn't enable these highlights automatically for you.
Right.
So you have to go to the commands and say manage live Spring Boot process connections, the first entry here. And then it tells you, okay, to which project would you like to connect, which process, and say, okay, I choose the pet clinic one that I just started. And then it grabs the information from that running instance and maps this stuff onto your source code. So in this case, I can again look, for example, over here and see, okay, this request mapping, I could click on that again and basically do the same in VS Code here. The thing that to me is very powerful about these mapping the live information, and this is just the starting, is that you can also see kind of the bean information. So usually if you hack up your Spring Boot application using Spring Beans, you use dependency injection, right? So you decouple all your stuff, you use Spring to inject the right dependencies. And however that works at runtime, let's say you don't really care about that, right? But what you care about at runtime is which bean gets really injected and how is all the stuff really wired up. And that is what's showing up in here as well. So for example, I have the owner controller class, and you can see if you hover over that there are two other beans being injected into that, the owner repository and the visit repository. You would expect that because that's the constructor of your class telling you, please auto wire this with Spring and inject those dependencies. So it's not hard to guess, but it is exactly telling you what is going on at runtime. So it is exactly telling you, okay, there are indeed two beans being injected, and it tells you where do those beans come from. So you could jump, in this case, okay, the owner repository, you could jump to that source code where this bean is being defined, where this bean is coming from. So you automatically see and can kind of manually follow all the injection steps between all your different components and navigate them instead of look up the type yourself or trying to find the right piece in your source code, which could be quite cumbersome. And you can see that both ways, right? So if I go to the owner repository, for example, I can see that as kind of a short version that this is being injected into the pet controller and the owner controller. So this repository is being used in those two other beans, and something else is being injected into this component. So I see it both ways, right? So I see where is my component being used, being injected into, and I see what else is being injected into this component. And I see that information all across the place, wherever that is being used, which I think it's really useful to understand what is going on at runtime in your Springy application. And you can do that in VS Code as well as Eclipse, and even in specific cloud IDEs, because there are some out there that understand the VS Code extensions. So for example, Eclipse Thea, which is kind of a cloud IDE, has nothing to do with the Eclipse desktop IDE. And it's used by some other kind of vendors to build their own cloud-based IDEs by big companies. That cloud-based IDE is also understanding the VS Code extensions. So you can just grab the Spring Boot VS Code extension, put that into Thea or a Thea-based cloud IDE, and could use basically the same tooling in that, which I think is really cool. And that's just an example of a few of those live information that we show up. You might have noticed that here's something like startup, for example, showing up. It's an additional live information from the app, because if you configure it in the right way, it will tell you how much time is being spent to create this bean, for example, at startup time. So how much time does it contribute to the overall startup time? So if you're interested in improving startup or thinking about, no, maybe my code is doing stupid stuff at startup, or it should do stuff at a different time, you would get this additional hint. And our job in the tooling is, again, to kind of grab that from the live app, and instead of do it yourself, map that into your source code and show it directly. which I think is pretty cool. So you can, of course, also kind of disconnect that again to get rid of the additional information if you would like to get your fresh, pure code perspective again. And then you're done with that. That's kind of, I think, very kind of interesting combination of these running apps and your source code and mapping that information. In addition to that, we also did something purely static on your source code to make it easier to understand your Spring application. So you can look at that from both sides, right? So from running apps and see what's going on at runtime, and okay, I have a huge Spring app, I just would like to get an overview. And in VS Code, users typically use these symbols, right? It's like an outline for just a file, giving an overview about what's inside the file, or symbols in your whole workspace telling you, okay, where are all the types, or where are all the interesting elements of your language in your workspace. And we enhanced that for Spring stuff. So for example, if you open up the search for symbols in workspace dialog in VS Code, you would see additional Spring specific symbols. For example, in this case, everything that starts with an // tells you all the request mappings that we in terms of the tools have found in your source code of your Spring app. So it tells you, okay, there are all my request mappings that I implemented in my source code. And that's just the look at the source code. It's nothing to do with the running app, just the source code. So if I would say, okay, what are all my request mappings that I defined for owners? Okay, it's over here. Okay, it's owner edit post, because I'm looking for some post request mapping. You can just directly jump to that and see pretty nice little, get a pretty quick, super quick navigation. Or you can do add plus, and then you see all your Spring beans that you define in your application. You can see, for example, I'm looking for something that's something as a repository. I think I called it repository, where all my repository beans being defined. So I just say add plus repo, some kind of search string, and see, it's a pet, vet, owner, visit, repository. Those are my 4 repositories that I implemented in my app. And I can quickly jump to them and see what's going on in that code. Of course, the same stuff is available in Eclipse as well. So let me just quickly stop the app again, so I don't have too much stuff running. If I'm, for example, here in my greeting controller, let me also kind of jump to the pet clinic one that I have. Pet clinic one, and I press Command 6, I would get the same symbols overview in Eclipse. So we try to keep that on par, right? So that you get the same experience, the same quick navigation, the same live information in both IDEs. So for example, if I type here, you can see kind of the same symbols showing up in Eclipse as well. Or if I say, give me an overview about my request mappings, things like that. It's even smart enough to say, give me an overview about my configuration beans. And in this case, it's really interesting because it's not only telling you have used the annotation add configuration in your source code at a specific class. It knows enough about the springy nature of those things that it will give you, for example, the pet clinic application class as well. Even though you did not annotate that with add configuration, you probably annotated that with Spring Boot application. But a Spring Boot application is a Spring Boot configuration, which is a configuration. So it knows about this hierarchy between those annotations, and therefore tells you, hey, this is an add configuration thing as well. So if I'm looking for, let's say, yeah, I would like to learn about all those configuration things, or all my components, or all services, all the stereotypes that I used in my app, I can super easily get an overview and jump between them and see and learn what are all my components. So that's what kind of gives you these additional navigation, the additional overview, learning about what's going on at runtime. And one thing that we are super happy about, because we implemented that for the latest version, is that this Spring Boot dashboard that I've shown you already tells you a little bit about what apps are running. You can quickly start and stop your app. It shows you what's in your workspace, right? And you can start and stop that locally as you would do that in your IDE, and you can debug them and things like that. But of course, we are not living in the purely local world anymore. People like to adopt the container world, like to use Docker for desktop stuff, configure their specific environments inside of containers for their apps. And Spring Boot has support for that already. So the latest Spring Boot versions, they come with built-in build pack-based support for building container images out of Spring Boot applications, which is super easy, right? You can just kick off your Maven build, say, please build an image, and then as a result, it builds a container image using the Paketo build packs behind the scenes to do that for you. And you can run that from the command line, but you could also do kind of a nice little gimmick here in the Boot dashboard. You could create a Docker target and say, okay, I have my local Docker desktop running on my machine. So let me integrate that as an additional view in my Boot dashboard here. And I could see what's going on my local Docker desktop. And if I would like to run something like Pet Clinic, for example, on that local Docker thing, I could just say, yeah, please run and debug that on my local Docker desktop installation. And what it will do for you behind the scenes and tells you what's going on, first, it kicks off the Maven build under the hood to use Spring Boot to build the container image for that. You can see here, Paketo build packs coming into, it's downloading the Paketo build. Sorry for that. I thought it's cache, but it looks like already an updated version. So it runs the build, downloads the build packs, and runs the build packs and creates the container image for you by using the Spring support. And it, of course, goes one step further. It also already runs, once the image is being built, it runs the image in a container for you on Docker. So you can see here at the moment, it's still building the image, but it looks pretty close. So now you can see, okay, there is an image that's being built or that's done, and it starts up the image in a container, and it would tell you, hey, this is the container that's at the moment being started up, or at least so the application inside of the container is being started. And now I see, hey, this app runs inside of a container in Docker. And I can use the same things as if this app would run purely locally on my machine. So you see the port is already automatically being forwarded to you, so I can just double click and jump to that app and see it, right? I can see the same highlights, the same information about what's going on inside of my application running in the container in Docker. It's automatically connected to the IDE, so it gives you the same information that I've shown before, but the app is running in Docker. And I started that in debug mode because, of course, it also connects the app in debug mode to the debugger. So let's say, for example, here I have a breakpoint set for owners new. So when I open that up in the browser, it opens the debugger, connects to that. So so without doing anything specific, any additional command line stuff, forwarding ports or whatever, I'm directly debugging my app that's running inside of the container in Docker from my Spring Boot app that I just created, and it's just a few clicks away. And that's what's really fun to use, because it makes kind of these configuring your container image and how that should be built. You can do that in your Spring build, right, in the way that Spring Boot supports that. And you can use it any way you like. But if you want to use it directly inside of your IDE, you can just drag and drop or say, hey, run this in debug mode, for example, or run this without debug mode, of course, also possible. And it gives you exactly that, forwards the log output to the console, connects the debugger, shows you the live information. So it's really, oh no, it's timed out. Debugged for too long, sorry. It feels like the same experience using this and working with this app as if this would run locally, purely locally, but it is running inside of the container. You can benefit from all the goodness, sorry about that, the goodness of running apps inside of a container, which I think is a pretty slick and pretty nice integration for that. And on
That's
top,
super slick.
Yeah, I love that. I'm super proud of the team who implemented that. It's I think it's very, very slick and very easy to use, right? So you don't need to be an expert in Docker and creating containers and connecting everything and how to debug and how to debug into that and how to see all the other stuff. We really try to say, hey, what would it mean to transfer the experience that you get from the boot dashboard for your local project running on your local machine? What would it mean to transfer this experience into the Docker world and say, hey, we really would like to get kind of the same experience out of that, plus the benefits of running stuff in containers. And of course, it is assuming some defaults. And if you would try to configure stuff manually, like specific ports, additional ports, and additional port forwarding, that's kind of not supported out of the box. It's just kind of supporting the standard, regular, simple way, and make that super slick, and opens up the door in the future for kind of additional customizations, which is still to be done for us. So that's a kind of a limitation of the support, but we really try to make the simple case super, super simple. And as an additional kind of a secret, super awesome benefit that some people don't like, but I like, is that in Spring Boot there is this additional module that's called Spring Boot Devtools. Not sure if you heard about that before, but you can put this additional module on your project, and that helps you in development mode, because it sets some good defaults for developing your app and hacking your code and changing your code all the time. Some meaningful defaults, but it also allows you to, for example, change your code, and it automatically restarts your app, your Spring Boot app, behind the scenes whenever you change your code. So whenever you press save in Eclipse compiles incrementally under the hood, as usual. So the Spring Boot app would pick up the changed class file and restarts itself. And this restart is pretty quick, because it does not restart the whole JVM. It just restarts the Spring Boot application part of the running JVM. So it doesn't shut down the JVM, which would take some more time. It just kind of restarts the Spring Boot part of that, which is pretty quick and nice to use. And you can do that. You don't really need to do anything special in the IDE to do that, because it's done by Spring Boot Devtools. But we managed to kind of connect that capability of Spring Boot Devtools with the Docker experience. So when you have Devtools on your project, and you deploy your app using this dashboard onto Docker, creating an image, running that in a container, the IDE will figure out, hey, this is using Devtools, so I connect to this specific Devtools in a remote way, like if this app would run somewhere else, which it is, because it's inside of a container, and transfer those changes to the app whenever something compiles. That's also done by Devtools automatically for you. But we just set it up and connect it automatically for you. So they can still do the same, right? You can hack your code, change your code, press save, and the change will be effective in your running Spring Boot app inside of the container, just out of the box, which is, I think, also pretty useful thing. Maybe not combine that with debugging and hot swapping with debugging, because then kind of everybody will fight for the change and try to update automatically. So that will cause some confusion in the JVM, in your running app, probably. But
and I assume it uses Spring profiles to switch between, turn that on and off if it's dev versus production, so you don't accidentally run it in production.
You can do that. I don't think it's done by default. Usually, you should use Devtools only for kind of your local dev experience, right? It should not really end up on the class of the project once you build the real thing and put that into production. And I think people mostly configure that in the build pipeline to do that for you. But yeah, it should definitely not end up in production and say, go, restart, change. Some people might like that, but probably not the right choice for everybody.
Right. Now, how much of this, if any, would also work with Kubernetes if you wanted to run in Kubernetes?
That's an interesting question, actually. So we haven't looked at integrating Kubernetes directly in this boot dashboard. And theoretically, I think the goal would be to provide the same experience. So that would be my goal, saying, okay, if you're running Kubernetes, you should get the same experience out of the boot dashboard or out of the super slick support that we built for containers and Docker for a Kubernetes environment that's running on your machine or wherever. But let's assume it's running on your machine, makes things easier. But of course, the interesting piece is how do you deploy stuff to Kubernetes? Because it's not saying run the container on Docker and then it's done and forward the port. It's usually, okay, you have to kind of have the specific YAML definitions for all these nice deployments and services and whatever you need, and then do some kind of port forwarding and forwarding the logs and things like that. So it complicates things a little bit and would require you to put more, let's say, opinion on these, what should be the default thing. So that if I don't do anything in my project, it's just a plain Spring Boot project, and I drag and drop that onto the Kubernetes environment that maybe shows up in my boot dashboard, how exactly should that be kind of configured from the deployment for Kubernetes to make that work and run?
I guess there is a bunch of other stuff, like I need to push it up to some sort of accessible registry. So there's probably 5 or 6 extra settings and steps you'd need to do up front, and then you'd also need to deal with the difference in like the API surface of Docker versus Kubernetes and the functionality it gives you.
And to me, I'm not the world leading Kubernetes expert, to be honest, but from what I've seen is that people use that very differently, right? One is using a kind tool to set up a cluster on the Docker thing, and then that makes it super easy to do X, Y, Z. So you could implement that experience based on that, but then someone else comes along saying, oh no, we don't use that. We use this other tool to set up, or we use Scaffold to do everything with Kubernetes, and the next one uses a totally different thing. So it doesn't seem like kind of there's a specific common ground that everybody is using that you can say, yeah, I will just use that. I will assume that's the way that people will do it anyway. So go with that. It feels like it's very different and very specific, a very, very individual choice how people deal with these Kubernetes environments. But that might change over time.
There is a bunch of projects that attempt to give you like a developer kind of experience with Kubernetes. So I wonder if the answer is to wait until those mature and integrate with those versus integrating directly with Kubernetes.
Yeah, it could be.
It'll be interesting to see kind of where that space goes.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's probably a dozen startups that are trying to solve the developer experience on Kubernetes right now.
Yeah, because it's a real question. Huh? It's a real challenge. So it would be great to have some kind of better developer support for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now the answer might be we probably shouldn't do it, but that's not going to stop us from trying.
Yeah. So we still have our eyes on that, and it's an interesting question how we should support that inside of the IDE. At the moment for us, it's we are not trying to go too much ahead of what is supported in Spring Boot out of the box anyway. So it's more like we support the stuff that Spring Boot supports, and Spring Boot will of course support more Kubernetes stuff and more container stuff. I'm sure that there are going to be tons of awesomeness coming out of that. And it feels like to me, most of the time, it makes more sense to kind of wait for that to mature and then surface that inside of the tools instead of doing things inside of the IDEs that are super specific to the IDE and super kind of disconnected from the framework or Spring Boot code itself. And then the framework moves into a different direction or provides a similar feature in a different way because they need to be independent of the tooling, of course. So with these container support in Spring Boot, it worked out pretty nicely to do the other way around, saying, okay, it's features coming along and coming up in Spring Boot, being published in Spring Boot. Let's be quick and early adopters of that. And surface that in the tools in a nice way and bridge the little gap that exists between running things on the command line and using things in a fully integrated IDE and make that a slick experience as we did with the Docker support for the dashboard, instead of, let's say, reinventing what the framework project or any other project that we support would do.
Now, with the newer Macs starting to switch to a ARM-based processor, I wonder if there's going to be some interesting changes there, because obviously an ARM Docker image versus an x86 Docker image are going to be different. If you can even do Docker on those new Macs yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. And if that maybe forces the need to use something external that is x86.
Yeah, from what I've seen is, I haven't seen a lot. I saw that the JDK stuff is that stuff is all being mostly done for the ARM Macs. And the Docker folks are working on a version that's running on ARM Macs as well, the M1. And I think that's also already there. I don't know the details of that, but let's say from my poor IDE perspective, I very much hope that most of the IDEs, they're running on a JDKs implemented in Java, so they will work more or less out of the box.
Right.
Might be a little bit different for Eclipse, because Eclipse has native parts due to the UI widget toolkit that they use. But there is, I think, already an ARM version of that somewhere. JDKs are there, Docker is there,
right.
So it kind of, for us, it sounds like we need to connect the dots, but then it's fine for us.
Yeah, I guess if everyone else solves it in their realm and they don't change how you need to integrate with them, in theory, it will just work, in theory.
Yeah, but I would love to get my hands on one of those new Macs and try it out. That would be awesome.
Well, I mean, I think you should definitely request one from IT, because you need one to make sure that people have a great experience.
Yeah, I
mean, you're doing it for the people.
I will tell you that you asked me for that, so it's you suggested that.
You do that.
I will. Cool. Yeah, I think I covered most of the stuff that I wanted to cover in my quick demo round. So let me kind of, as a good German bureaucracy follower, clean up my workspace a little bit and delete the stuff from my Docker thing again. So stopping everything. And yeah, I think that was kind of my walk through some of the demos and some of the stuff that I wanted to show you. Happy to answer more questions. If like any questions came up during me talking all the time. Otherwise, if people want to use those things, there is, of course, the web page for spring.io/tools, where you can get all the information and all the additional links from. So if you have any questions about the tools, go to spring.io/tools. You will find downloads for the ready-to-use distribution for Eclipse. You will find a link to the marketplace for VS Code, where you can grab the VS Code extension from, the Spring Boot specific ones. By the way, also integrating the start.spring.io experience into VS Code as well, for example. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise a question on Stack Overflow. Happy to answer that. If you have issues, enhancement requests, additional feedback, we would be super happy if you raise an issue on GitHub. Enhancement request, things that are not working, things that are working, but you would like to see working differently. So we are very, very happy, because all of that stuff that I showed you, it's all open source and it's all free to use. You can just grab it from the Spring page and from the marketplaces and use it, right? And whenever there's something, reach out to the team, because whenever you file an issue at GitHub or ask a question on Stack Overflow, there will be folks from the tools team hacking on the tools, also answering those questions, interacting with the community all the time, and helping people to solve issues when they use those tools. So that's an important part of our daily work, and we are super happy to directly get engaged with all these thousands and millions of users around the globe who are using the Spring tools to do that. So those are the links. You can find them on the webpage. And would love to hear from you. If you have any ideas, any additional feedback, feel free to reach out to us.
Very cool. Now, it seems to me like if I wanted to learn, if I was new to Spring and wanted to learn a bit more about Spring, I could almost go here, get the Spring tools for Eclipse or for VS Code, use the initializer and use the guide system and kind of just get a hold of, you know, the guides and start learning it through the example code. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think especially using the guides and maybe looking at the Spring.io websites for the guides and seeing what's all there, because exploring what is all there, which guide fits my needs,
right?
That's maybe not the right thing to do in the IDE, because you would have to kind of import all the guides to look inside.
Right, but I could look at the website, find the guide, and go, oh, this is what I'm interested in, and then use VS Code to import that guide and just kick it off without having to like do any Git clones or like set up pom.xmls or anything like that. That sounds like it'd be really good, like first time use experience. Is there a good write-up on how a person would do that? Like starting with almost no Spring or Java experience. Like,
so nothing that we do from the tools project side to really, let's say, educate people when they start with Java and Spring. I think there are other resources out there that are better suited for that from the pure Java and Spring perspective. What we have on the, let me just go to the project. There's kind of the GitHub page. There's a wiki where we have, I hope, a pretty comprehensive user guide for people trying to use the tools and trying to learn what I've shown, basically.
Yep.
There are great YouTube videos out there showing the tools in action. And there's also going to be great videos from Josh, for example, showing you how to learn Spring and how to get started with Spring using those tools or using other tools. So as a beginner for Spring, I think I would recommend going or reaching out for those, or looking for those videos, those documentation. And when you then, as a next step, try to start to use the tools, would like to learn a bit more about the tools, I would recommend to take a look at the user guide and see, okay, how do I get started? What are the different options? And then you would see, hey, you can use the starter Spring or wizard. How does it work? It explains you a little bit how that works. If you would like to use this live information, for example, that I've shown, you can see pretty comprehensive description about what you would need to do to set that up or to configure it in the different environments, how to deal with that. There's, I think, pretty nice introduction about the boot dashboard and how that works. how you can use that, different possibilities and options that you have. But that's kind of, to me, kind of a second step, right? As after you started to learn Java and Spring, then maybe dive deeper into the tools.
Yeah, very cool. So I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. So our longtime viewer, SweetKiller9, actually mentioned that he had no idea that a lot of these things are here and available. And he's been around Spring and stuff for a long time. So it's good to see that we're bringing some value to our friends and teaching some stuff.
Cool.
That is kind of our goal. So it sounds like we're doing it.
Awesome.
Do you have any further words of wisdoms or anything like that?
Nothing specific. I would really like to encourage people to try out those tools. And I know that IDEs and developer tools, they are very, very important to all the developers out there in the world. And whenever you have anything that you don't like, or that you are missing, or that doesn't work, or that is cumbersome, and you would like to get changed inside of your tools to make you more productive, reach out to us, right? So really, really reach out to us and tell us what is missing, what is not working. And then we would be super happy to hear from you. That's cool. I think one of my main requests for the community out there. I think my video is gone. No idea why, but
I accidentally killed your video. I was trying to stop your screen share remotely.
Okay,
and accidentally killed your video.
I can do that. So
yeah, no, I was trying to do it without interrupting you, and I failed miserably.
Oh no, no worries. So maybe I can.
Can you turn his video back on?
Feel free to start your video back on.
Yeah, I tried, but it doesn't work.
Oh, really?
Anyway, as long as you can still, as long as you can still hear me.
Can still hear you.
That's good. Good that it didn't stop while I was doing the demo. Oh, now it tells me some. You asked me to start the video again.
There we go. That's better.
I did that. Okay.
Awesome. Here
I thought I was being clever, and I ruined everything. That's the story of my life.
And I fixed it.
No worries. Yeah, but that would be my let's say, if you ask me for final words, is always saying, hey, thank you all for using the tools, and please give us feedback and tell us what you're missing and what you're worried about, or what you would like to be, what you would like to get added to the tools and things like that. So as someone said, feedback is the breakfast of champions. So give us feedback, right? That's what is super important for us.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Tiffany. As always, thank you so much for helping me host and run this thing.
Thanks to you too.
Bye.
Bye.